For more on Colombia's election coverage, we're joined by Jason Marczack. He's the Deputy Director of Adrienne and Arsht Latin America Center at the Atlantic Center. Jason, are you surprised by how tight this race really was?
Well, that's a great question. I think in the end, I wasn't surprised because this is a pivotal election for the Colombian people. But right now, President Santos, since November of 2012, has started a process of negotiating, as you said, ending 50 years of armed conflict with the FARC. This is a fundamental transformation in the country. The election hinged upon two different tacks of how the country moves forward on the peace process. President Santos sees this as an opportunity to consolidate the gains that he's had as part of the peace process. They've negotiated 3 of the 6 points of the agenda, whereas his rival, Oscar Zuluaga, says that if he was elected president, he will immediately end the peace talks temporarily and give the FARC 8 days to issue a complete.
He definitely takes a harder stance when it comes to negotiations with the FARC.
He definitely takes a much harder stance with regard to negotiations.
So why is the vote so close between these two men? I mean, wouldn't people in Colombia favor a ceasefire with FARC rebels and more of Santos's approach as opposed to Zulaga's?
Right. That would seem correct, but I think we also have to take into account the fact that the peace process is not the top issue before Colombian voters. When you look at kind of the main concerns for Colombian voters, that actually ranks number 6 on the list.
What's number 1?
Number 1 is the lack of jobs. 17% say that's the biggest issue. Just like most other countries.
Right.
Lack of jobs, the security, healthcare, education, poverty. Those are all the top issues. The conflict comes in at the 6th with 5%.
That's interesting.
So the campaign hinges around this. Santos made his campaign around this, but in some regards, maybe he steered too much in the direction of having the campaign revolve around the FARC.
And that was my next question: whether he did too much campaigning as far as FARC goes, and at the end, maybe that's why this race ended up being so close. What about the ugly political attacks and scandals? This has been called one of the dirtiest campaigns in recent history. I mean, do you think that sort of turned off voters? Because we spoke to our reporter in Bogota, and she said voter turnout was actually low. It has not been tremendous. Do you think people were just sick and tired of hearing of that nonsense and wanted to deal with bigger issues?
I think that's part. The voter turnout was only about 40% of voters turned out. This is the lowest in the last 20 years. 10% less voters turned out than the last presidential election in 2010. I think that the scandals did turn off a certain significant amount of voters. But Colombia is also a country that has transformed dramatically in the last decade. Since the Plan Colombia started in 2002, the Colombian economy has been growing at, just since Santos took office, at over about 4.7%. Inflation is at all-time lows. Unemployment is all-time lows. So things are going very well in Colombia. Colombia recently hosted the World Urban Forum to show off the transformations that Medellin has made in the last couple of decades. So when you have things basically going right for the country, and then that's combined with scandals, that can oftentimes result in voter abstention.
And it seems scandals always kind of go hand in hand with Latin American politics. But anyway, so let's talk about some of the challenges that whoever wins. First of all, your prediction. I'm going to put you in the hot seat and say who you think will win this election, this runoff.
Yeah.
And what are the biggest issues facing that person? You talked about the economy.
Right. Well, I think the economy is obviously, I guess your first question. I think it'll partly depend on. There were 3 other candidates who are contesting the election today, and it'll partly depend on where they throw their support as well. Because with neither Zuluaga or Santos getting even 30% of the vote, the other candidates will be incredibly crucial, their support for what happens moving forward. But I think it's also about consolidating the gains that Colombia has made in the last decade. Colombia is a member of the Pacific Alliance. It's a grouping of countries in Latin America that has free trade, building a stock market together. Actually, they even opened up joint embassies together. Consolidating some of the gains of things like the Pacific Alliance, or there'll be the question of the U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement that went into effect a couple years ago. There's been some protests from some of the farmers who are worried about some of the threats to their products because of the openness. And so dealing with some of the growing pains of a country that has transformed dramatically, is increasingly part of the global economy. Those are going to be some of the issues that I think the next president will face.
And very quickly, your prediction.
You know, I think it'll be a very close race. I think it's likely that President Santos will pull it off, but you know, I think
got it out of you. Okay.
I think it'll really depend on who the other candidates
All right.
support. So
Thank you so much, Jason Marczack. Thanks so much.
Thank you very